All right. We're back.
We are back.
So, and for those maybe who have just joined us, I'm Nathaniel Marsh, CEO of Dads for Kids. This is my good friend Andrew Gray, host of The Man Show on YouTube. So,
yeah, we're having a great stream so far, I think. Lots of great guests, lots of diversity, lots of common themes and patterns coming through, actually. What have you been hearing so far?
Oh, look, I loved Ola has, really gone to a lot of effort there with his book. And, I mentioned it during the interview, but, I think certainly here in Australia, but in Western nations across the world, masculinity or, men and boys are often sadly seen as almost like a problem.
Yes.
And so he's actually gone through and looked at all the different personality traits of boys and looked at, how you can encourage them, maybe what the weakness of that is, because there's always a good and a strength and a weakness to everything.
Yes.
And it looks like a fantastic book. So.
Yeah, well, I think he's happened onto something that's actually a really important part of the conversation, this idea that it's not a new idea, it's actually a very old idea that needs to become new again.
Yeah.
Boys are different to girls. And they're meant to be, and it's okay, but that therefore means you have to parent them a bit different.
Yeah.
You have to educate them a bit different. You have to coach them a bit different in sport. And if we don't do that, and particularly in the Western world, we're seeing a feminist or feminine approach to how we're nurturing our young boys. It's not working.
No.
It's making a mess of them in the classroom, on the sporting field, and we've got to get back to what used to be common sense, this idea that the differences and the diversity is both true and good. I'm fortunate, I'm blessed to have a daughter and a son, and there are differences in how I parent them based on personality. But there's also differences in how I parent them based on the fact that one is a girl, one is a boy. My boy is the younger, he's 11, and I fairly regularly say to him in our conversations, when he's asking questions about why this, why that, I'll explain the answer to his question, and I'll say to him, son, part of my job as your dad is I'm trying to get you ready for being a man yourself one day. Because he'll sometimes say, but, he'll name his sister and say, she didn't have to do that. So you don't need to worry about what happened with her. I'm trying to raise you, and it's a different journey for you. And so I think his book pointed out that really crucial detail, that there are differences. And I've had great concerns and grievances actually for a long period of time around the education system, particularly, how we don't cater for younger boys. Especially the ones that are not academically inclined. And we lose them through the cracks at a very young age.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, David Maywald will speak a bit about that, I think. But, really, the Western education system is letting down boys often.
Big time.
So, speaking of David Maywald,
speaking of the man.
Yeah, the man, a great man. And I've got to plug it again. Here's his book. Is it actually out yet, David? Can people purchase it already?
Today's the day.
That's right. Yep, today was the big day. It's done the global launch.
Let me help you.
Yeah. So as you can see, Nat and Andrew
we're
now
both holding it.
Holding up the proof copy. That was one of the original first printed copies of the book. I've been signing copies of my book today at Paulo's Zero Suicide Awareness. Fantastic event. Wow, emotional, informative, so timely. He's such a good guy. And I love you guys too. You're some of the good ones out there. So it's fantastic to be here. I've been watching for the last 3 hours, and it's been a wonderful live stream.
Thanks, mate. You're very kind, David. You're very kind. Thank you. And, David's a great supporter of both of us, and we're so thankful for your support, mate. And the book is just, it's fantastic. Much needed, and maybe we'll talk a bit about the book, but just for those, we have the pleasure of knowing you, David, but maybe can you tell us a bit about your story, how you came to be here, how you came to write the book?
I'm a proud Australian man, a father, a husband, and I was blessed and am blessed to have a son and a daughter. And I've had a passion for boys' education for 30 years now. Going back to the mid-90s. I've been tracking this space of boys and young men in education, men's health, longevity, suicide for decades. I started posting on social media in 2014, talking about the disparities between men and women in Australia, education, health, longevity. You know, for example, here's a stat for you. 1/6 of Australian men will die before retirement and die before getting their superannuation.
Wow.
About double the number of women. So we think about the golden years, but men retire later, die sooner, and 1/6 of them will never enjoy the golden years.
Yeah.
So the disparities are just enormous. I come to it sort of from a stats or maybe a, you know, like an intellectual perspective, but also carry my own stories and feel, you know, passionately for my children and all the other children at the school where we're involved in. But I've been aware of these disparities for a long time, and I think it's great now that people are starting to pay attention and to talk about them and show a bit of intellectual honesty about what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And we spoke earlier about that. It does seem like there's a vibe shift, certainly in the States. It's maybe we're still yet to catch that here, but I mean, thanks to Andrew's work, your work, David, and there's so many people doing great things. It does feel like maybe the pendulum's coming back.
Yeah, a little bit.
So let me talk about that for a second. There's this fabled, mythical pendulum. Now, in my book, in the first chapter, I put up a very different interpretation of this. You know, I look back over the last 200 years, and instead of thinking about this as a pendulum, I think it's been much more of a one-way street. There's the image, a bit hard to see from the distance. But what I've traced is that we've really gone from having an androcentric society, a deeply androcentric society that favoured and preferenced males and their interests and traits. Now we've gone the other extreme, which is a highly gynocentric society. And, mate, when I look at this, it hasn't been going backwards and forwards. This has been a one-way street for 200 years.
Yeah, wow.
And it wasn't healthy when it was deeply androcentric. It's not healthy now when it's highly gynocentric. So we actually need to see a pendulum. We need to see the pendulum swing. It's only gone in one direction.
Yeah.
And it's way out at an extreme right now. We need to see balance so that the masculine energy and the feminine energy can dance together and so that we can collaborate in the interests of the future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, David, I am reasonably convinced of is this idea that for a pendulum swing, or if we want to get away from that phrasing, for us to see a shift or a turn in societies, it's crucial that we have individuals who will speak at whatever level and sphere they find themselves in. I think one of the misnomers is that people believe they've got to have a certain size or type of platform in order to open their mouth, but that's not actually true, is it? It doesn't matter whether you're, a local community sports coach or you're a federal politician or something in between. Start where you are. Would that be your view?
Well, the coalition of supporters for men and boys is still pretty small, to be honest. In some instances, it's a bit of an echo chamber. It's a bit insular. It's a bit inward focused. If we're going to achieve real cultural change and then eventually legislative change and institutional change, we have to massively grow that coalition. And you're exactly right, Andrew. We've got to speak to hearts and minds and reach people who don't even think about boys and men right now. You know, we've got to use stories and emotional connections to people to spark their interest, you know, to capture their imagination so that they understand. You know, one of the key epiphanies I believe is happening is that the younger women who benefited significantly from women's empowerment and gynocentrism, as those women reach marriage and childbirth, when they have sons, there's this incredible epiphany. You know, the same things that benefited them in their teens and their 20s and their 30s, they now recognize that those are structural barriers to their own sons.
Yes.
So when I sit down with a mother who has 2 or 3 sons, you know, some of them are distraught and they're in despair.
Yes.
Because their boys are disengaged. The education system doesn't cater to their needs. You know, they're worried about their future. They're worried about disparities legally in family court, losing all their assets. They're worried about suicide. So we need to reach the mothers of sons, the grandparents. We've got to reach religious, traditional. We've got to engage with migrant communities who are often quite socially conservative. They understand this stuff.
Yes.
They know how important family is as a social institution. So exactly, we've got to speak in lots of different ways to piece together this much, much bigger coalition so that eventually we can speak with a louder voice and be heard by decision makers and media and eventually politicians to change the laws.
I think we want people to buy the book, so go out and get the book, but without giving too much away, David, because people will hopefully see this when they read the book, but maybe what are some ways, maybe can you give us your top 3 or 5 ways that we could do that? I mean, what are some ideas that you've thought about this a lot, and, you know, props to you for, you know, you've been tracking this a long time. Whenever I talk to you, I always learn something new, David. So what are your, you know, maybe can you share with us the top tips to how can we turn this ship around, so to speak?
So I'll give you 3. Let's talk about education, about health disparities, and about suicide. In education, mothers and fathers are the biggest champions and the biggest advocates for their children. So, you know, I've been involved, I've asked questions at school. Do you have books that are really interesting for boys? How do you teach this subject? You know, is it actually a barrier? Is there accommodation that meets the needs of each individual girl and boy in that class? In the area of health, there are some enormous disparities here. You know, Australian health research funding, women's health gets 5.4 times as much as men's health, even though men die 5 years earlier, and the mortality for men is 1.5 times the mortality for women. You know, prostate cancer, for example, the testing for prostate cancer is nowhere near as accurate. The treatments for prostate cancer are nowhere near as effective. So even though men are more likely to get cancer, they're significantly more likely than that to die from cancer. So we've got to call that out. Yeah, we've got to speak up, and we've got to, you know, demand the funding is spent. We've got to demand that there are improvements in testing and treatment. And we've got to help, you know, speak up for all men, for boys, and to get social balance there in the way that our taxpayer money is being allocated. In suicide prevention, I've been inspired by what was achieved in Finland. They cut the suicide rate by 60% over a period of 3 decades. And early in that long period of work, they did an investigation of every single suicide death. They looked at the circumstances, they collected the data, they understood where the hotspots were, and then they used that insight to work between government, civil society, religious organisations, the specific industries that were mostly at risk. You will see in the book, like, we have a really good idea about where the high levels of male suicide are. We've got a really clear understanding of that. But the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, Paulo today was saying that there's only 5 paragraphs in like 100 pages which relates to men.
Yeah.
And the Australian Men's Health Forum is correctly, you know, recalls that only 3 of 117 measures in that strategy mention men or men's services. So we're spending all this money, hundreds of millions of dollars, but male suicide's going up. An extra 100 men and boys killed themselves in 2024 compared to 2023. What we are doing is not working. Female suicide went down last year. Male suicide went up. So we are not getting an effective outcome for that large expenditure of taxpayers' money. Please do read the book, because in chapter 5, I talk about 10 solutions and reforms, you know, in detail. And that's the hope for the future, that we can turn things around.
David, we know that the data is telling us, and the anecdotal material is telling us how problematic and dysfunctional the family court system is, not just here in Australia, but globally. A multi-part question to you. In your opinion, how big a correlation is the dysfunction of that system to our male suicide problem? Secondly, have we got a hope in our lifetime of fixing that system? And third, how will that happen if we're able to achieve it?
So I've attempted to quantify the response to your first question, Andrew. Currently in the Anglo countries, male suicide is 3 to 4 times higher than female suicide. If you go back before the Family Law Act in Australia, the ratio of male to female suicide was about 2, sometimes under, sometimes about 2. And actually, there are a lot of countries around the world that have a male to female suicide ratio of about 2. India, China, lots of parts of Africa, Middle East, Mediterranean. So it's interesting, isn't it, that some of the wealthiest countries in the world, some of the most advanced and developed societies in the world have male suicide that's 3 to 4 times higher than female suicide, when there's all these other examples when it hasn't been that high.
Yes.
Now, I do the thought experiment of what would happen if we were at what's a more normal level. So currently in the West, in the Anglo countries, so the 5 large English-speaking countries, including Australia and New Zealand, Canada, US, UK, those 5 countries, we lose 50,000 men and boys to suicide every year, every single year. If we had a level of male to female suicide similar to the rest of the world and to the previous decades, we would be saving 23,000 souls every year, every single year. 23,000 this year, 23,000 next year, 23,000 the year after that. And think about the ripple effect of all of those losses. It's massive. Enormous. It's the mums, it's the wives, it's the children, it's the friends.
That's right.
So, mate, how do we change that? Part of it is legislative, right?
Yes.
I think the women who are being honest, a lot of them recognise that we've lost balance. We've lost the fair, equal treatment.
Correct.
For mothers and fathers, for wives and husbands, that it's not working, that this is a key reason of situational distress that Paulo talks about that leads to suicide. Now, part of it's legislative. To change that, you have to have a majority of the Senate. You've got to have the government on board. It would be very difficult without the government supporting it and without having a majority in the Senate. I think actually things will get worse in the next 2.5 to 5 years. I'm really worried. I'm really worried there'll be further changes that result in family breakdown, situation of distress, and more male suicide. Just like I said, last year, 100 more men committed suicide.
Yes.
The other side of this is cultural change. How do we respond to this crisis, this call, this distress? You know, I love that more young people are curious about Christianity, that they are rediscovering. Sometimes the first person in their family to go to church with atheist parents. Like, I think, you know, the Christian covenant of marriage is much more robust in terms of the relations between men and women and resilient. And it's a much more safe, protective social institution for children than the secular legalized marriage that we have in Anglo countries. People can choose to get married in a church. They can choose to turn to each other, to faith. They can follow God-given design. So it's a 2-part answer here. There's some things we can do culturally to respond to this crisis, but to see legislative change, we have to build a big coalition. Men and women of goodwill working together in the interests of our children and future generations.
Yep.
That's excellent. David, we're going to have to leave it there, but we're going to hear from you later, aren't we? Are you joining us again later? So thank you. Thank you. Check out the book, everyone watching. Make sure
congratulations on the book.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Well done, and it's a labour of love. But just Google the book, or is there a specific website they should go to?
So you can Google, you can search for The Relentless War on Masculinity by David Maywald. It's available from Amazon, Apple Books, Google Play, from Booktopia. Google, search for it, and you'll find it.
Great, fantastic. Well, make sure you pick up a copy, everyone. And look, thank you so much, David, for your time. We've got to hear from Jerome now, the founder of International Men's Day. But I'll see you later on, David. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.